left for the wolves in the desert. An Apache woman's life changed by one fearless rancher. The sun blazed mercilessly over the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and orange. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of dust and dry earth, where nothing could be heard except the wind, carrying the smell of sagebrush and cactus. Amongst the harshness, the lone figure of Zaya, an Apache woman, walked through the desolate land, each step growing heavier as her strength drained away. Her clothes were torn from the long trek. Blood dried and caked on her arms was the only reminder of the battle she had fought. Her people had betrayed her, casting her aside after a raid went wrong, leaving her to die in the desert. Alone, hungry, and injured, Zai was no stranger to hardship, yet she could not shake the feeling that this time the desert would not let her survive. Zaya had always been strong enough to endure the many trials her life had thrown at her, but this was different. The weight of betrayal felt heavier than any battle she had faced. She had fought for her people, bled for them, and yet they had left her to the wolves. And now, those same wolves circled, their eyes glowing with hunger in the fading light of the day. The sun sank lower in the sky, and the temperature dropped quickly. Zaya stumbled forward, her head spinning from the heat and dehydration, her feet dragged in the sand, her boots barely able to lift from the ground. She had to keep moving. Her survival depended on it. But the more she tried to push forward, the more the weight of her situation pressed down on her. She had no food, no water, and no strength left. The wolves were coming. She could hear their howls in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Just as Zia thought she couldn't take another step, she heard something that wasn't the wind or the wolves. It was the sound of hooves, distant but unmistakable. Someone was out there. Her heart raced, and she forced her tired eyes to look around. She was alone, yet the sound persisted. She had no choice but to stop and hope that whoever was coming would be a friend, or at least someone who would put her out of her misery quickly if the wolves didn't get to her first. The hooves grew louder. The figure that appeared over the ridge was a man, riding a powerful horse. He wore the rough clothes of a rancher, a cowboy hat low over his eyes, and a weathered face marked by the desert sun. His horse's hooves kicked up the sand as he rode toward her. Zia tried to stand tall, but her legs buckled beneath her, and she fell to her knees. The world blurred before her eyes. She was too weak to keep her guard up, too weak to fight back if needed. The man's horse slowed as it approached. His eyes scanned her, noting her condition, the blood on her clothes, the sweat on her forehead. Zaya was aware of him, but she could not find the strength to speak. She didn't want to trust him. She couldn't. But she also knew she couldn't survive on her own much longer. He dismounted swiftly and crouched beside her. "You're not one of those bandits," the man said in a gravelly voice. His words were direct, but there was no malice in them. "You're Apache, ain't you?" Zia nodded slowly, too tired to argue. "I'm Cole Hardwick." "I'm here to help," he said, his voice steady as though this was just another day in the desert. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small canteen. "Water," he said, holding it up to her lips. Zaya hesitated, but her thirst won out, and she took a small sip, the cool liquid sliding down her throat like a lifeline. "I don't need your help," Zia finally said, her voice rough from thirst. "I'm fine." Instead, he gave her a small nod and stood, walking to his horse. "I'm not leaving you out here. You can walk, or I can carry you, but I'm getting you back to my ranch." Zia watched him for a moment, her mind clouded with confusion and suspicion. She didn't trust him. No one could be trusted. She had learned that the hard way. But the wolves were still out there, and her strength was fading fast. It'd be foolish to fight him now, to refuse his help. "Fine," she said, though her pride made the word feel like acid on her tongue. "But if you try anything, I'll kill you." Cole didn't seem offended by her threat. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he had heard it all before. "I won't try anything," he said. "But you should know, if I didn't want to help, I wouldn't have come. Now let's get you out of here before those wolves show up." Zia didn't respond. She let him help her to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. She couldn't decide if she felt relief or resentment. All she knew was that she needed rest. As they walked toward his horse, the howl of wolves echoed through the desert again. Closer now. Zia's heart pounded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to lean on another person. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get her through the night. Cole helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with ease. His hand rested lightly on her waist, steadying her as they rode through the darkening desert. The moonlight cast long shadows over the sand, but Zaya didn't pay attention to them. She had other things on her mind, the loss of her people, the betrayal, and now, this strange man who was giving her a chance when no one else had. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. The desert night was colder than Zia had expected. The air was thick with the smell of sagebrush and the dry, dust-scented wind that seemed to carry the secrets of the land. She was wrapped in a thick blanket Cole had given her, sitting by a small campfire outside his ranch house. Her muscles ached, and her body felt as though it were filled with lead, but the warmth from the fire and the cool air of the desert night made her feel alive again. She stared into the fire, the orange glow casting flickering shadows on her face. The night was quiet except for the occasional rustle of the wind, the crackling of the fire, and the distant call of a coyote. Zaya had always loved the desert at night, with its eerie stillness and the way the stars seemed to stretch across the heavens like a never-ending ocean of light. But tonight there was no peace in her heart. Cole had been kind to her, offering food, water, and a safe place to rest, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had to stay on guard. She couldn't afford to trust anyone again, not after what had happened to her, not after her people had left her behind. She glanced over at Cole, who was tending to his horse near the campfire. He moved with a steady rhythm, preparing the animal for the long journey he would face tomorrow. Zia had never seen a man like him, calm, capable, and seemingly unaffected by the hardships of the desert. His dark hair was wild under his hat, and his face was tanned and weathered by years of living under the harsh sun. Despite the rugged appearance, there was something gentle about him, a quiet strength that drew her in. It made her feel both safe and uneasy at the same time. "Are you going to sit there all night?" Cole's voice broke through the silence, and Zaya's gaze snapped to him. He was standing, hands resting on his hips, looking at her with an unreadable expression. His tone was not harsh, but there was a certain firmness to it. "You should eat something. It'll help you heal faster." Zaya hesitated, her stomach growling faintly at the thought of food, but she crossed her arms over her chest. "I'm fine." Cole raised an eyebrow but didn't press the issue. He walked toward the fire, sitting down across from her, and unwrapped a small bundle of roasted meat. He looked at her for a moment, then sighed, holding out a piece toward her. "I'm not here to force you," he said. "But if you keep refusing help, you're only making things harder on yourself." Zaya didn't respond immediately. She was still fighting the stubbornness that ran deep in her veins. Her people had taught her that relying on others was a weakness, that it was better to die with honor than live with shame. But as the hunger gnawed at her insides, and her body reminded her of her exhaustion, she realized that survival was more important than pride. She finally took the meat from him, her fingers brushing his briefly. It was warm and tender, and she ate in silence, savoring the taste. Cole watched her with quiet patience, his eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful of the desert's dangers. "Where do you come from?" Zia asked after a long pause. Her voice was low, but it was the first time she had spoken to him without the sharp edge of distrust. Cole's eyes softened, and he leaned back, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm from a ranch outside the town. Been working the land for years. My family—" He stopped, his voice trailing off for a moment. "They're gone now." Zaya noticed the sadness in his eyes, the brief flicker of pain that passed through them. She didn't push him to explain more. People had their own stories, their own battles. She knew that much. After a few moments of silence, Cole stood up and tossed a few more logs onto the fire. "We'll leave at first light. I don't know much about your tribe, but I can get you to a place where you'll be safe. You don't have to keep running." Zaya's heart tightened at the mention of her people. Safe. She had been safe once when she had been with her tribe, but now? They had cast her out, left her for dead, and she could never go back. She would never be accepted again. Her eyes hardened, and she shook her head, though her voice softened. "I don't want your pity. I can take care of myself." Cole didn't argue. Instead, he walked over to where his gear was packed and started preparing for their journey. Zaya watched him for a while, feeling the mix of emotions she couldn't place. Part of her wanted to refuse him, to push him away, but another part, one she refused to acknowledge, felt a spark of hope. She hadn't felt that in a long time. The night passed quietly, with the desert stars shining brightly above them. Zaya slept fitfully, her dreams a mix of the past and the future. She dreamt of her people, of battles fought and lost, of the family she once had. But she also dreamed of something new, of a life she couldn't quite imagine, one where she wasn't alone. She woke up several times throughout the night, staring at the fire and wondering what was next. When the first light of dawn broke over the desert, Cole was already awake, packing up their things. Zia rose with him, feeling the stiffness in her body but also the strange warmth in her chest. The sun's rays were just beginning to touch the horizon, and for a brief moment the desert seemed to come alive in a way that was almost magical. "You ready?" Cole asked, offering her a hand. His expression was still calm, but there was a glint of something else in his eyes, something she couldn't name. Zia looked at him for a long moment, then stood on her own, refusing his help. She was still the woman who had walked through the desert alone. But now, for the first time, she didn't feel completely lost. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Cole gave a small nod, his lips curving upward in what could almost be called a smile. He turned toward his horse and motioned for her to follow. "Let's go then. I'll get you to safety." As they rode off into the early morning light, Zia couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice. She had been left for dead, abandoned by her people, but now she was riding alongside a man who had shown her kindness. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like there was something worth fighting for. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Cole and Zia made their way across the barren desert, the hot wind sweeping across the land like a living thing. The sound of the horses' hooves echoed through the dry earth, and Zia found herself becoming used to the rhythmic motion of the ride. At first she had been stiff, uneasy, but now her body was beginning to relax, even as her mind remained guarded. They had been traveling for hours, and the heat of the desert was relentless. The world seemed to shimmer in the distance, the air rising in waves, distorting the horizon. Zia had grown up in the harshness of the land, but this heat was different. It was suffocating, making even the simplest breaths feel heavy. Cole had been quiet for the most part, guiding the horse with steady hands and taking care of the supplies. His expression remained calm, but there was a quiet intensity to him. Zia watched him from the corner of her eye, still trying to understand him. He was a stranger, a man who had risked his life to save hers. He didn't know her anything, and yet he had done more for her than anyone else ever had. The desert, though vast and unforgiving, was not the only thing that weighed on Zia. She was still trying to come to terms with everything. The betrayal of her people, the loss of her tribe, the realization that she might never find a place to call home again. The life she had once known seemed like a distant memory, a dream that had slipped through her fingers. "Are you sure this is the way to your ranch?" Zia asked after a long silence. Her voice was dry, the words barely audible against the sound of the wind. Cole glanced over at her, his eyes narrowed against the sun. "We'll reach it by nightfall. It's a couple of hours yet, but I've got it covered." Zia nodded, unsure if she should trust him. She wanted to, but the walls she had built around herself were strong. She couldn't just let them crumble because of one man's kindness. She had learned that lesson the hard way. They continued their journey in silence, the only sound being the creak of the saddle and the occasional snort from Cole's horse. As they neared a rocky ridge, Cole pulled the horse to a stop, his gaze scanning the horizon. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, his voice low but firm. He dismounted, tying the horse to a nearby rock before turning to Zia. "You need to drink something." She didn't want to show weakness, but the exhaustion from the journey was catching up with her. She slid off the horse, her legs shaky, and accepted the canteen he handed her. The cool water felt like a blessing against her dry throat, and she drank deeply, not stopping until the canteen was empty. "Better?" Cole asked, his eyes watching her carefully. Zia didn't answer right away. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, feeling the sand stuck to her skin. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. I don't know why," she said quietly. Her words were simple, but there was a deep honesty in them. Cole looked at her for a moment, his face softening. "I don't do it for thanks, and because no one deserves to be left to die in the desert." Zia felt something shift in her chest, a flicker of warmth that she quickly suppressed. She couldn't afford to feel anything. She had been let down before, and she wouldn't let herself become vulnerable again. "Do you think I'm weak?" she asked, her voice sharp. It wasn't something she had meant to say, but the words slipped out before she could stop them. Cole paused, looking at her with a mixture of understanding and something else she couldn't quite place. "No," he said finally. "I think you're strong. But even the strongest people need help sometimes." Zia stared at him, unsure how to respond. She didn't know why his words felt different from the countless others she had heard in her life. But they did. She wasn't used to people showing kindness without wanting something in return. And yet, Cole didn't seem to want anything from her. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. As the sun continued its descent in the sky, the temperature dropped, and the air began to feel more bearable. Cole spread out a blanket on the ground and began to prepare a small fire. Zaya sat down, still unsure of what to do with herself. She had been alone for so long, surviving on her own. Now in the company of this stranger, everything felt different. She was still afraid of what might come next, of what she might feel, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to relax, even if just a little. Cole handed her some bread and dried meat. She took it, her hunger making her grateful for the simple meal. As they ate, the conversation turned to the ranch. Cole spoke about the land he worked, the animals he tended to, and the peace he had found in the quiet life of a rancher. Zia listened, intrigued by the way he spoke with such certainty about his life. He seemed so sure of himself, of where he belonged. It made Zia realize how lost she truly was. "I used to have a family," Cole said suddenly, his voice low. "But they're gone now. Bandits attacked the ranch a few years back. I've been on my own ever since." Zia looked up at him, her heart tightening at the sadness in his words. He didn't dwell on it, though, quickly moving on to talk about something else. Zia didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to comfort someone who had lost so much, especially when she herself was carrying so much pain. She knew what it was like to lose everything, to be abandoned by the people you loved. But somehow, hearing Cole speak about his family made her feel less alone. As night fell, the stars appeared one by one in the clear desert sky. Zaya lay back on the blanket, staring up at the vast expanse above her. The universe felt so big, so endless. It reminded her of how small she was, how insignificant her struggles seemed in comparison. Yet, there was something beautiful about the way the stars shone, as if they had always been there waiting for her to notice. Cole sat a few feet away, his back against a rock, keeping watch. Zaya closed her eyes, trying to ignore the way her heart seemed to be beating louder than ever before. She was getting too close to him, too comfortable. But the truth was, she didn't know how to keep running anymore. She didn't know if she could survive on her own for much longer. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." Cole's voice broke through her thoughts, and Zaya turned to look at him. He didn't say it with any grand promise, but the certainty in his voice made her believe it. She didn't know why, but she believed him. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't alone. The morning light broke across the horizon, painting the desert in hues of pink and gold. It was the kind of morning that promised a new beginning, but the winds carried the scent of danger. The silence of the night had given way to a quiet unease, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Zaya stood beside the campfire, her eyes scanning the distant ridgelines. The events of the last few days had been like a whirlwind, and now, in the calm of the morning, she could feel the weight of it all pressing on her shoulders. She had traveled far, leaving behind everything she had known, everything she had fought for. But she was still here. She had survived. Cole was packing their belongings, his movements steady and practiced. His silence spoke volumes, but Zia didn't mind. He had never pushed her for answers, never asked about the life she had left behind. He treated her with respect, with understanding, and that was something she had never truly experienced before. "Ready to go?" Cole asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. He had finished securing the horse and now stood next to her, waiting for her response. His eyes were fixed on her, but there was no pressure in his gaze. He simply wanted to know if she was ready. Zaya nodded, her chest tightening slightly. She had become used to the stillness of the desert, but now, as they prepared to move forward, it felt different. The weight of her past, of her people's betrayal, pressed down on her. But the future, however uncertain, was waiting. She couldn't keep running forever. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of all she had lost. They rode for hours, the sun climbing higher with each passing moment. The desert, once so vast and endless, now seemed like a familiar companion. It whispered secrets to them through the wind, through the endless stretches of sand and rock. Zia felt herself growing stronger with each step, each moment closer to the ranch, to the safety Cole had promised her, but she knew it wouldn't be that simple. By midday, the desert had begun to shift. A dust storm, fierce and unforgiving, rose up in the distance, blotting out the sun and turning the air to a suffocating, swirling mass of dust and sand. It came quickly, faster than Zia had expected, and soon they were engulfed in the storm. Cole gritted his teeth, his hand steady on the reins as he guided the horse forward. "We need to find shelter," he shouted over the roar of the storm. His voice was barely audible, but Zaya understood. She clung to his back, her grip tight as the wind howled around them. The storm was relentless. Sand stung her skin, and the world around her turned into a blur of dust and chaos. Zia fought to keep her bearings, to focus on the sound of Cole's voice, on the rhythm of the horse's hooves beneath her. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of them, but she trusted Cole's judgment. He had been in the desert long enough to know how to survive its fury. After what felt like hours, Cole led them to a small cave at the base of a rocky outcrop. The storm raged outside, but inside the cave it was sheltered. The walls of rock blocked out most of the wind, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Zia felt a sense of calm. They dismounted, and Cole quickly led the horse into the cave, securing it to a small outcrop. Zia followed, her legs unsteady from the long ride and the exhaustion of the storm. She collapsed onto the ground, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she knew they were safe for now. Cole sat beside her, his expression serious but calm. He had a way of staying composed, even in the face of danger. Zia admired that about him. He didn't rush into things, didn't let fear dictate his actions. He simply did what needed to be done. "We'll stay here until the storm passes," he said, his voice steady. "It won't be long." Zia nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed him. The storm outside continued to howl, a constant reminder of how unforgiving the desert could be. But in the shelter of the cave, the noise seemed distant, almost muffled. For the first time in days, Zia allowed herself to relax. They sat in silence, the only sound being the storm outside and the occasional shift of the horse. Zia stared out at the swirling dust, her mind racing. She had been running for so long, and now she wasn't sure where she was running to. She couldn't go back to her tribe, not after everything that had happened. But could she really build a new life? Could she find peace after everything she had lost? She looked over at Cole, who was sitting with his back against the rock, his eyes closed. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He had become something more, someone who had shown her what it meant to be cared for, to be protected, even if only for a brief moment in time. He had offered her safety in a world that had left her behind, and for that, Zia was grateful. The storm seemed to drag on for hours, the winds picking up and shifting, but eventually it began to quiet down, and the dust settled. The air was thick with the smell of rain, and the sky began to clear. As the storm passed, the desert returned to its stillness, the land now washed clean by the fury of nature. Cole stood up and stretched, his movements fluid and sure. He glanced at Zia, offering her a small smile. "The worst is over," he said. "We can move out soon." Zia stood, her legs still unsteady, but she felt a sense of determination welling up inside her. She wasn't going to let the desert, or anything else, hold her back. She had made it this far, and she would continue to fight for her future. They left the cave, the world outside now calm and quiet. The desert stretched out before them, endless and unforgiving, but also full of possibility. Zia had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. Together they rode forward into the desert, their path uncertain but their resolve firm. The journey ahead would be difficult, but Zia was no longer afraid. She had found something worth fighting for. She had found a bond, a connection that she hadn't known she was capable of. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the desert, Zia knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the strength she had always carried within her.